So yeah, welcome everyone to our latest Airside Chat with Safe Landing. We are really excited to speak today with Claudia from Matrice on their project Planete Ciel, or Planet Sky as it's translated into English. I'll let Claudia introduce herself and the project in a minute, but I'll quickly introduce myself and Safe Landing first. And for those of you who have just joined, please do introduce yourselves in the chat. So I'm George. I'm the workers' participation lead in Safe Landing. I used to be an airline pilot for EasyJet before I left around about 4 years ago now, due to my concerns about the impact that aviation was having on the climate, but also so that I could help make sure that we can fly into the future in a way that minimizes the damage to our climate through our work in Safe Landing. Finley, I'm here with Finley and Dan. Also, we're here with Finley and Dan from Safe Landing. Finley, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, yeah, my name's Finley. I'm the think tank lead at Safe Landing. My background is I'm an aerospace engineer and I'm based in Scotland in the UK. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Finley. Hi, everybody. My name's Dan. I'm also a member of the Safe Landing team, mostly involved in community, so building and supporting members of our global community in Safe Landing. Also a former pilot like George. I flew for TUI and BMI Regional. I was also a flying instructor before that. Um, and like many people here, I love flying and I want to see a great future for flying. I stopped because of the conflict I experienced between, that love and the environmental impact of it. And yeah, really appreciate any opportunity to work with other people and hear different perspectives and think a bit about what that future might look like. So I'm also in the UK in North Yorkshire.
Great, thank you both. And I'll hand over to Claudia in a minute, but I'll introduce who Safe Landing is for those of you that is your first time to us. So Safe Landing is a global community of aviation workers, enthusiasts, and future-friendly flyers. We're all united, as you've heard, by our shared passion for flight and a commitment to a sustainable future. We create spaces where people connect, share ideas, and find courage to act together. Through our three interconnected areas, our community area, which Dan is part of, workers' participation, which is me, and our think tank, Finley, we channel expertise, curiosity, and collaboration to shape a future where aviation flourishes in harmony with nature. And we champion sustainable visions of air travel that protect our planet, inspire action, and ensure the beauty of flight endures for generations to come. And we'll hear about some of those potential futures in a minute from Claudia. But first of all, workers' participation, which is the main sort of topic we're on today. We know that governments, policymakers, and large operators shape industrial strategy, but the voices of those who live and work within the system, aviation workers, are largely absent from the decision-making processes. Decarbonisation plans and operational change are often one-sided, driven by institutional interests rather than participatory processes that harness frontline expertise. And here at Safe Landing, we champion and implement participatory democratic mechanisms such as workers' assemblies, which you can read about more on our website, that enable aviation workers to envision a sustainable future for our industry and use our knowledge to shape a fair transition. And this supports the industry's ability to create these longer term strategies that actually deliver environmental and social well-being. So today we're going to be speaking to Claudia from Matrice about the project Planete Ciel, where they've created 4 visions for the future of aviation. Claudia's going to be presenting for about 20 minutes. Afterwards, we'll have a few minutes for some short clarifying questions. And then we'll be going into 4 breakout groups for 15 minutes. These won't be recorded, so don't worry about that. Each group will be discussing one of these 4 visions, because we really want to hear from you about what you think, how desirable these visions, and maybe how feasible these visions are as well. After that 15 minutes, we'll come back into the main room, share our thoughts, and we'll be finishing hopefully around 1 p.m. We'll see how that goes. If you do need to go before that, please do. But with that, I'm going to hand over to Claudia.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me properly. And thank you, Safe Landing, for inviting me today. I'm just going to share my screen before I start up talking. Can you all see my screen? Yes? Because I don't see you.
Yes, all good. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, thank you, George, Finley, and all the team for inviting me today. As George said in the introduction, I'm going to be talking about a really interesting project I had the chance to work on and lead last year about the possible futures for aviation. This is a project that I directed when working in a French innovation and social institute called Matrice. I'm a future thinking, which is quite a particular speciality, but I'm going to be walking you through that as well, because it's basically this project has enabled us to build 4 alternative visions for the future of aviation that are, we're going to be discussing them today, thanks to all these future thinking methodologies that enabled different actors throughout the whole aviation ecosystem to work together. So, Planete Ciel, well, that's the French name, as you can probably see. We can translate it by Planet Sky in English. In the end, it's a book, it's a graphic novel, but it was created as a 1-year artistic and scientific residency on sustainable narratives for aviation. And we had the chance to work with more than 80 aviation experts from the ecosystem, 4 authors, illustrators that were really important in the process to, once we had built the scenarios, illustrate and fictionize the narratives. And we also did workshops with citizens to really be able to question them as well about what are those desirable futures and what do they mean. So to tell you a bit more about the project, we launched in October, so by the end of the year of 2024. And we did different workshops with all of the different actors of the ecosystem. As I said, and this is one of the main, this is why the project is really interesting, is because we really tried to get a 360 vision of all the different narratives of the actors of the ecosystem and build together. So we did different workshops. We had the chance to also present and organize an event during the Paris International Air Show. And then the book was launched by the end of 2025 in September throughout also a public event in the center of Paris. So as I was saying, for us, and it was really important since the beginning of the project to involve all the different stakeholders of this wide and varied ecosystem. So we had the main industry actors, Airbus, Air France, in France, of course. I'm talking about main industry actors in France, Airbus, Air France, Aéroports de Paris, and Safran. And then we also work with actors from the innovation ecosystem, also from academia, of course, and also many actors from the NGO sector, because that's important to us as well. And they all were pretty active in the workshops. We had like participation of around 40 people every time we organized a workshop, which was quite good because there were like workshops that lasted for like 3-4 hours to be able to build the different scenarios and for the future. So I wanted to tell you a bit about the methodology and how we build these future narratives, because as I said, I'm a future thinker, but that's not everyone's familiar with future thinking methodologies. So basically the process is what you see on this slide. The first step is to ensure a systemic vision. So create a space where all these different stakeholders can work together and create together, and also have discussions and dialogue on the future, even though their visions are sometimes not on the same line, or I don't want to say opposed, but sometimes they are. So what we do is work with them and ensuring this systemic vision of all the challenges of the sector. We also, and this was really important, with our authors and illustrators, we went to visit like the actual work of aviation workers, thanks to the main companies and also the universities that collaborated with us, to be able to dive and see like the behind the scenes of this sector. because I mean, for you are working in the aviation sector, so you already know. But as the goal was to build narratives for the general public through illustrated fiction, this part is really important so that we can actually understand what is happening in the real life of people working in this sector. Then there's the third phase, which is to collectively build visions of the future. So this is when the future thinking methodology comes in, and we are able to build 4 alternative scenarios for the future and work from that to decline them into fictions for sure. And you're gonna see when I'm gonna present the visions later on. When we say 4 alternative visions, I mean, it's impossible to be 100% exhaustive about the future. Sorry, we're obviously, this is like a project that aims to explore 4 possible futures, and we chose those futures with the people that participated in the workshops and with all the stakeholders engaged in the process. But what I mean is that for sure choices were made, and we will. I mean, it's not an exhaustive work because that's simply impossible. And in the end, then the last step is to create a fiction that is actually accessible for the for an average citizen, let's say, that people can actually understand what are the challenges that the sector faces, and also what are the possible futures depending, and that's really important in future thinking. What are the possible futures depending on the choices and the decisions we make today? So yeah, this is about the global methodology, but I've already explained this. It's just the way of how we work from the major issues to the orientations and then scenarios and narratives. So to get a bit more concrete and practical, this is the 4 scenario orientations we ended up working on. I say ended up because, of course, in the beginning we didn't know what the orientations we were going to be working on. They were decided with all the different stakeholders that were part of the workshops, as I said, and those stakeholders were representative of all the different actors of the ecosystem. So there was one scenario around innovation, trying to answer the question, what are the most significant and impactful innovations at scale for aviation by 2050? There was a second orientation around the industrial transition and how can we assure a gradual planned transition preserving European competitiveness and of course adhering to an ambitious climate trajectory. We also wanted to explore a more, let's say, pessimistic or at least negative for most of the stakeholders in the room, which is a world without planes. So what happened if this actually if actually we were facing a world where flying has stopped because of climate events or other reasons? What are the uses that are prioritized? And the last one about our relationship to travel, because I continue to think that this is a really important point of many of the challenges that aviation faces today. It's how we question our relationship to travel in a context of climate and social tensions. So, as I said, all this work ended up in a book that you can see there, a comic book, 4 narratives, 1 comic book. So 4 narratives, 4 scenario orientations illustrated into 4 fictions. And of course, the contribution of many different authors, of the stakeholders that participated, that also wrote articles in the book to comment and answer the questions of the vision. So this book is read as a like hybrid object, because you have like the fictional part, but also like the expert comments, and that's what makes it really interesting, and also really helpful for the general public to better understand the challenges and be able to project themselves into what the future might look like. And what we've also seen is that many of the different stakeholders we collaborated throughout the process have also used this book and bought it for their own workers in the companies, to be able to sensibilize and around the future and also what this, how the trajectories that are being built today could end up in function of the decisions we make, because in the end, that's the goal of thinking about future about visions of the future. So yeah, for today, and George said it, so we're going to be working, I mean, you're all going to be working in 4 different workshops. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to introduce the workshop by explaining and pitching the 4 different visions / fiction, because it's a mix of both of them, so that you know what they propose and also the key assumptions for each one of them. And then you're going to be working in your different groups to discuss how those visions are desirable and how probable they are. So yeah, the first one, as I said, is around innovation. We called it Inventing the Future. And this narrative basically is about the idea of how can, I mean, the dominant narrative around the future of aviation today, which is quite technological. At least that's what we observed throughout all our workshops with the experts from the sector, but also with citizens. This idea of traveling through hydrogen or electric planes. I mean, it comes a lot at least in the general public narrative. And in the end, what this fiction and this narrative tries to address is the question of what kind of innovation and what does innovation mean? Because in the end, we see that there are these 2 kind of camps throughout this idea of innovation. On the one side, those that are like that bet on the timely success of low carbon innovation, particularly sustainable aviation fuels that will come and replace kerosene and heavy hydrogen promises. And on the other, well, just so on the hydrogen promises, as we all know, this was a work done by the end of 2024. So things have evolved since then. So just important to keep in mind. And on the other, those who are skeptical, about the scale of the challenge of deploying this innovation at scale fast enough, let's say. So also asking the question of how can we combine this innovation, like this technological low carbon alternative, with a regulation of the demand. And this narrative was illustrated by Elie Huot, which is one of our authors. You can see the type of illustrations he did. And I just wanted to give you a bit more of insights about the assumptions we use to build this narrative, because I think, I mean, without reading the whole story, you'll get a better idea, at least if you have the assumptions. So the first one, I mean, we have the French aviation sector, government and investors have agreed to support innovation in sustainable aviation as a long-term policy. Renewable energies become significantly more abundant and cheaper than today, thanks to technological advances. European countries have fomented strategic alliances with countries in the global south to secure renewable and mineral energy resources in exchange for the transfer of European technologies, enabling the green industrialization of these regions. So we're thinking, of course, at a global scale. So we also work on the assumption that the large scale of use of SAFs has become a reality into 2050. I think I said it in the beginning, but all of these narratives are projected in 2050. Traditional airlines operate different types of aircraft, so conventional, but also hydrogen and electric, depending on the route. So we would have a combination of those different kinds of planes. The market sees new competitive aircraft manufacturers emerging, breaking out the duopoly, I don't know how it's in English, particularly for hydrogen and electric aircraft. So we see all these new startups and companies that are working on the new technological aircraft actually emerging and having a place in the market. There's also a reduction of the demand because of the gradual increase in ticket prices. And there are new regulations that accompany this development, such as a kerosene tax. This is for the first one. How we're doing with time? Okay, I still have time to present the 3 others in detail. So yeah, this is kind of aesthetic you get. The authors and the illustrators are really great. I have to say, we were really happy with the work they did. Yes, so this is the second narrative. So it's around industrial transition, and we called it, the fiction is called Shared Trajectories. And the idea is to say that we need all of the stakeholders to coordinate and work together towards a transition. And this is complex, and we know, but if we actually want to arrive and to reach the European ambition of net zero emissions by 2050, this narrative presents a world in which we actually manage to reach this objective. We need the whole sector to engage, and so what we explore in these narratives is how can we make this transition possible. So clear political will, of course, which is capable of combining social justice, ecology, and economic interests with a shared vision of the futures. So it questions, and this is really important, the accountability and potential sacrifice of all actors and how all of them engage towards this transition: airlines, engine manufacturers, aircraft makers, airport operators, energy companies, but also investors. None of them are spectators, they all have a role to play. And yeah, so this narrative aims to explore how does that work. It was illustrated by Eloise Joshua. It's a different style. And the key assumptions that were made to build this narrative is, well, the first one I already said it, Europe's net zero trajectory ambition is on track and achieved by 2050, and there are several factors that potentiate this. The first one is that there's a major European public and private investment plan in low carbon technologies. There's a collaboration, and this is really important and interesting in the narrative. There's a wide collaboration between transport and non-transport industry players. So a systemic vision of mobility and how it can integrate towards a low carbon mobility sector. There's also a new distribution of transition responsibility among sector actors. All of them are involved and all have a role to play, and they're all responsible. There's also, of course, an industrial and mass production of SAFs. And we're also paying attention on how industrial workers are also, start taking and working in new jobs to be able to transform the sector. And also there's another assumption that is explored, that is the idea of new democratic tools that are used to prioritize certain decisions. Yeah, this is the second one. As I said, the four different visions, doesn't mean that they're all opposed. They're just alternative visions that explore also different themes amongst the future of aviation. So yeah, and then we get to the third one, which is the one that I told you, A World Without Planes, which we called Against the Wind. And actually, this is interesting because for sure it actually disrupts our usual representations of the future. But we really thought it was interesting to make stakeholders think about what a world like this one would be like. And so the idea is that we live in a world where the southern hemisphere enjoys a privileged position and can continue to use air travel, whilst the north have experienced really strong and heavy climate events, such as huge winds that are largely grounded, and that actually make flights impossible to happen in the north. And so what is interesting is that we question ourselves in this narrative about how the ways of life of people are actually affected, how communities evolve, of course, all the dramatic consequences from an economic perspective and job loss and all of that, but also how can we connect differently to others and different forms of freedom and mobility. So this fiction was illustrated by Maureen Guérin. She's another one of our authors. And the key assumptions that were made to build it is I said it, the multiplication of a no-fly zone, leading to a loss of international connections due to also geopolitical conflicts. The competition for energy resources leads to binding trade-offs for aviation. So we are in a logic of resource scarcity, which means that aviation is no longer considered a priority use. The impacts of climate change, as I said, that render certain regions inaccessible, and aviation is now reserved for essential or emergency travel, with a sharp decline in social acceptability as well. So the imaginaries also change of flying. And then there's a reduction in air traffic that is imposed by strict and necessary regulation in Europe. And also the sense of community has strengthened with a close-knit social ties replacing mass travel. So it's a world where mass travel doesn't exist as we know it today. And also flying has become an unpleasant activity, increased by turbulence, loss of control over flight duration, because of the strong winds that I said before. And yeah, my time is nearly out, but I'm on to the last narrative, so which is around our relationship to travel. And this fiction was illustrated by Pierre Janot. And this narrative explores actually how our relationship to travel today and the reason also why we travel also affects what's happening with the transition of the aviation sector, and how it could be different. This relationship could be different in the future. Throughout this future scenario, we have a look at our societal model, an actual societal model, which is obsessed with speed, and how aviation has become and traveling has become banal and hurried in a world where everything is instant and now and where time is compressed. So we don't longer know. It's a world where we no longer think of distances; we erase them. Traveling. We always think of traveling as going from spot A to spot B without thinking about the journey itself. So this fiction tries to think about what will happen if this model ran out of steam. What if instead of always rushing, we learn to slow down? So it imagines a future where actually the mindsets have really changed in this sense, where we really think that time is important and the time to travel. And traveling is part of the journey. When I mean traveling is like what now is done in a plane in 2 hours. It could be like a longer journey that is part of the whole traveling experience. So journey becomes a path again. So this is the idea of this fiction. And what does this mean? How does this transform our infrastructures and our way of traveling? And what does this mean for also the aviation sector? So the main assumptions that were made for this narrative is, the first one is that travel has become a conscious endeavor, as I said. Air travel now concentrates basically on long distance routes. The tourism sector itself has also transformed, therefore prioritizing the local with a reorientation toward regional destinations. We imagine as well a reduction in traffic forces. Airports have become energy hubs using renewable resources, so there's a really interesting evolution of infrastructure as well. Mobility becomes a globally conceived system. Popular destinations have been protected or renovated, while certain areas lose their appeal due to the effects of climate change. And finally, airlines collaborate with rail networks for short-haul journeys. So this is the world we imagine in the fourth narrative. Yeah, and this is all. And so we're going to be breaking up into 4 different rooms. And what we thought would be interesting for today is that you work with us, you mainly, with thanks to this probability versus desirability matrix, which is a type of graph that we use a lot in future thinking, trying to discuss and evaluate and decide together where would we position the different visions that I just presented. So I'm gonna let George maybe jump in.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, for sure, I'm here. So.
Yeah. what we'll do is, well, first of all, thank you, Claudia. That was really interesting, and I wish we had an hour to listen to more of that because I know I was like, oh, I really want to hear more of more of that vision and more of that vision and more of that vision.
Yeah,
I've
I
certainly
agree.
got like a million questions, but for the purposes of this session, we're going to be breaking out into breakout groups in a minute to discuss these visions in much more depth.